Aloha mai kako, aloha. Thank you all for joining us at the 10th Annual Seattle Asian American Film Festival. My name is Kalei'okalani or Kalei, and I am the discussant for today. And I'm moderating the program, including Cane Fire by Anthony Banua-Simon and Malihini by Ha'aheo Auwae-Dekker. This Q&A will be really exciting today, so mahalo for joining us. And before we get started into the rest of this program, we wanted to begin with a land acknowledgement. I would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the tribes of our areas. And if you are tuning in from places other than Seattle, please do take time to acknowledge the peoples who have been stewards of the land since time immemorial, and lift it up to them. So, e po e ike ia aina o Duwamish, mahalo nui loa no ko kako mana nui pau ole, mahalo nui loa no ko lako kokua malama ike ia aina, mahalo. So, we are part of Seattle Asian American Film Festival, and we are welcoming two of our directors here today. I wanted to first begin with welcoming Ha'aheo Auwae-Dekker, who is the director of Malihini, a short that I'm so excited to dive into with today. A little bit about Ha'aheo as well is wanted to share with you and their work with Malihini, that it is an introspective look into Hawaiian identity and living on the mainland, using candid conversation with their mother to dissect and deconstruct where they come from and how their family has lived in the diaspora. Ha'aheo is also a current student at Seattle University, which is also my alma mater. Hey. And I would also like to have Ha'aheo introduce themselves as well.
Mahalo, my name is Ha'aheo. As Kalei has already said, I'm a current senior at Seattle University. I am the child of Henry Auwae and David Dekker. My grandparents are Henry Auwae and Betsy Ibarra, as well as David Dekker Sr. and Mary Minton. I am so happy to be here today and share this work with you all.
Mahalo, Ha'aheo. I also want to take time to introduce Anthony Banua-Simon, who is the director of Cane Fire. Just so excited to draw the parallels between both of these films and dive into that today. And a little bit about the film itself. I wanted to share that Cane Fire is following 4 generations of Anthony's extended family on the Hawaiian island of Kauai, beginning with his great uncle's immigration from the Philippines to work on a pineapple plantation. It also chronicles his involvement in the labor movement and highlights Filipino labor activist Pablo Manapat. Anthony's grandfather left Kauai as a young man and eventually relocated to the Pacific Northwest, further connecting us here at Seattle Asian American Film Festival. Anthony, if you wanted to also give some introduction today.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to show the film in Seattle because I grew up in Bremerton, Washington, and went to high school in Seattle and Evergreen State College in Olympia before moving to New York, where I'm based now. But I would always visit as a child, like would take trips to Kauai to visit my family, once as a child and then a few more times as an adult, and would have cousins visit, and it was always interesting, that exchange and meeting my grandfather's brothers. And yeah, I'm just really excited to show the film here.
Mahalo to you both. I hope you enjoy this next moments that we have together, diving into this Q&A. And yeah, before we dive into the questions, I also, a little bit about myself. Again, my name is Kalei, and I am the founder of Ha'aheo Auwae-Dekker. It's a Polynesian dance troupe, and we're based out of Seattle. I also previously was on staff with Seattle Asian American Film Festival, and I feel so honored to be back here today and being able to be a part of this program. Myself, I am from Wai'anae Oahu, o Wai'anae Ku'u Onehanewe. Wai'anae is the sands of my birth, and I'm a native Hawaiian, Japanese, Black, and Chinese woman, and a mother of a young daughter who's 8 months old now. E ka'upepe o Makali'i. And I am wife to Kitman Matsui. And I'm also a fur mama to my dog, Hakubaku. And I live here now in Seattle. I've been here for about 11 years now. And just so excited to draw a lot of parallels with a lot of our experiences with us three here. So mahalo nui loa for everything that you have done to bring us to this point. So to dive into some questions, I wanted to just get warmed up, as well as I'm also personally interested, just to talk about like the titles of the film. I know that in a lot of the description of, for example, Cane Fire, it does dive into right at the start of the film, the history of the original Cane Fire film. And I wanted to ask, like, what was your thought process in naming your film that as well, Anthony? And then for Ha'aheo too, in no particular order, your choice of Malihini, and what does that mean for our audiences? So.
Who should go first?
I should go first? Okay, well, in terms of the title for Malihini, I sat with it for a really long time. I wasn't sure what it was going to be called, and for so long it remained nameless. And only with that, I sat with like the feelings and just like the experience that I had with this film. I filmed it during COVID, which is a time. And the one thing that just like kept repeating in my mind was when my mother says, I feel like a foreigner in a foreign country. For those audiences out there who don't know about Hawaii, Malihini means foreigner, and it's a very different word than the word that many people know, which is Hawaii. And that Hawaii has become a term that is so heavily associated with white people. Malihini is specifically about this feeling of being outside, and this feeling of being a foreigner, and this feeling of like not belonging in this area. And so I felt that Malihini just really captured what my mother and overall like my experiences of being a Kanaka Maoli and a Hawaiian who grew up primarily on the mainland.
Mahalo for sharing that, Ha'aheo. Anthony?
With Cane Fire, so Cane Fire was the tentative title for what's considered Kauai's first Hollywood production. And it was shot by female film producer Lois Weber, and came out in 1933. And the official title after was White Heat, but it was always known as Cane Fire while it was being produced. And it was shot in Waimea, Kauai, in an existing plantation. It was a plantation melodrama about a manager falling in love with a worker and that was on the plantation, and this big romance and drama. And the Cane Fire is kind of the climax of the film, where somebody starts an out of control cane fire and the plantation burns down. And I'm sure many people know that cane fires are part of the harvesting process of cane sugar. It's burning the stalks, burning the leaves so that the workers can access the stalks and cut them down and ship them to be refined in California if you're coming from Hawaii. And so it was looking for this film that was shot nearby where my great-grandfather was working. He was working at the Hawaii pineapple cannery, but they were doing location shoots all over the island, and the Hawaii pineapple cannery was next to Waimea Sugar. And so it was this idea of, they're filming this shoot with the plantation workers as extras. This idea of what if he had been in the film, and I had to track down this film, which has actually been lost since the 1960s. So it was looking for this lost piece of history, and then also acknowledging that this cane fire that happens in the film had been censored because it was very tense at the time with the labor movement. The plantation workers were unionizing, and there was momentum, and so any sort of chaos or revolt was seen as very frightening for the owners at the time. So it's acknowledging this kind of censorship or tampering down of this growing movement. And so, the cane fire was something that was, the starting point of asking around about this lost film, and then it kind of became less and less relevant, rather whether the film was ever found. It was kind of the entry point.
Mahalo for sharing. Yeah, I do really enjoy the history behind those titles, especially as Ha'aheo had mentioned, like Haole, it's originally started as foreigner, and now it's just associated with like specifically of white people, and how Anthony, in your film, you like immediately started off with like, I'm Haole boy in my family. I think every half family has one too. I have a Haole boy in our family too, but and then it's also a confusing term because over time it has become an endearing term in families and it doesn't tell the full story anymore. So I really similar to how like Cane Fire, the way the final edition came out does not tell the full story. It's censored, and I really appreciate like your use of the titles to reclaim that, and also very interested in how you used Malihini as well, because for as a self-identifying as Native Hawaiians, interestingly enough too, in another land. And I feel it as well. I'm like first generation Seattle Native Hawaiian in my family. And so my Pepe is second generation. And when you think about it that way, like of being Malihini here. So we go deep. So mahalo for sharing that. I wanted to ask as well more, on the creative and visual side of things. I could see that both films had a very purposeful and intentional use of like distortions in a way. I mean, Anthony, I think the description of your film Cane Fire is talking about how it's a kaleidoscope, and it's just like splicing together so many different elements with photography, found footage, Hollywood footage, oral histories, and a lot of like other personal items. And then in Malihini, Ha'aheo, seeing the specific choice of layout, like format, sizing of it, dimensions, and then the sound and the colors used too. So I wanted to ask for all the people watching at home, why, and why? Yeah. So what was the thought process in creating that look?
For me, I can just jump in, but just to continue on, why I chose this film Cane Fire as the intro of the film is this kind of, there's this material history of Kauai. You have so many things going on, people fighting for their rights as workers, as residents, and people tied to the land. And then in parallel, you have this kind of myth generating projection, representation of what's happening. And it went from the sugar companies to the US government kind of projecting what they wanted at this goal of, statehood eventually. And so taking all these different sources was kind of like, both showing what was happening in parallel, then showing, oh, this is how it was being sold to people and why. And, after these big Hollywood productions, these big Technicolor productions that were pushing tourism and statehood, what happens after in contemporary times with user-generated media kind of reflecting these myths, maybe unknowingly with tourist travelogues, or pulling from plantation era to explain luxury real estate, what place it has today, and then how they are selling it. That's really the kaleidoscopic. It's all these different sources and kind of recontextualizing them in parallel with as I guess a through line of history.
That's amazing. For me, Malihini came from a long journey of just happy accidents and like emotions. This film originally was a school project for myself that one of my professors assigned to me in the film studies program at Seattle U. And when I was making it, it was driven by my need to ask my mother questions about us and who we are before I come to an age where my mother is now an elder and I start to regret not asking her questions. And so a lot of the visuals is like sort of driven by this like need for home video books. We grew up losing a lot of the home videos over a whole course of moves we went through, from Hawaii to Las Vegas, our ninth island, to like Los Angeles and all these other places I had ended up living throughout my life. We ended up losing a lot of things that just in moves get lost. And so a lot of the graininess of the actual visuals is inspired by that. And just like even like the like sort of blue and red filter is inspired by this like VHS feeling. I mean, my family, we didn't even get rid of our VHS TV until I was like 17 years old. My parents are very sentimental people. And so a lot of the visuals is inspired by that, and just also like the happy accidents of trying to make a film in COVID. In terms of the audio, I interviewed my mom over FaceTime, and then I had like voice memos up on my phone recording while I was FaceTiming her on my computer. And then in terms of like the visuals, I was like, okay, how do I effectively make sure that we're being COVID safe? And so just like that was like a whole 2-week period, and that 2-week period having to sit with the audio and like think about how I want to spend my day with my mom, knowing the information she gave me and like knowing how she feels and who she is. And so, yeah, it was just a lot. It was a very long journey of like transforming it from my need to know who I am and my need to know who my family is, to being like a college project, to then being what it is today. And so it's gone through a lot of transformations, but it's necessary, and it needed to be what it is right now.
Speaking to the heart, mahalo for sharing that, both of you. And it's causing me to springboard in so many different directions. Like I have so many questions in so little time. But yeah, just to kind of reiterate on those points, I appreciate like how it took both of you to distort people's ingrained idea of reality in order to show the true reality. And just like, let's leave that there for a second and appreciate that. But yes, and I guess I wanted to also highlight, right, as you had mentioned, Anthony, like the Hollywood films that you showed and Technicolor, and just very straightforward, and just to show that their agenda of what they wanted reality to be, of pro-military, like anti-unions, pro-tourism and pro-annexation, and how film was used as this huge public relations monolith that only one people controlled, and how we can just like raise it up and give thanks to y'all being directors and using that media and flipping the script on that. So mahalo nui loa for being that in the communities, for sure. And what you had mentioned, Ha'aheo, too, about, okay, now getting these types of stories from your mother. I wanted to ask you both, you know, coming from a more like, what is the word? Just like audience member perspective, not myself like a filmmaker. I know very basic information about how to establish trust with your subjects and putting that then into a film, like with using their stories. And I know that both of you have relations, Ha'aheo fully to all the subjects in your film, and Anthony to not all the subjects, but many. How was that process in establishing that trust? Like how did you build that? How did you go about that as a filmmaker?
I jumped in last time, so I'll let you go.
It originally started as this trust of like, I'm your child, you're my mother. And it originally started as, hey mom, I'd like to do this project. Can I interview you? And her being like, okay, sure. Being like willing to do it, a little hesitant, but willing to do it. And over the course of the time, just like while I was interviewing her over FaceTime, just being like, I just want you to know, I am your daughter, I am your child, but you are also being made into a subject. You're being essentially immortalized in like this video form. And so like, if you feel uncomfortable at any point, or if you feel like you need to take a break, because this is like heavy emotional stuff, let me know. And she was like, for my daughter, I don't really care. And I was like, okay, mom, it's okay. It was just a lot of like trying to establish to my mother that beyond the fact that she's my mother, she's now the subject of being filmed, and also like being the subject of this, and how to like make her understand and have her realize that as a filmmaker, almost like sometimes being a filmmaker sort of like puts a wall between that relationship of familial relations, and that like you have to maintain not just professionalism, but maintain a sense of like, how do I make sure that I'm authentically capturing you, and how do I ensure that you feel good in that? And that was a lot.
That's great.
Mahalo for sharing. That is a lot. Like, and also, you know, you're trying to steer like the fact that this story is going wider, much farther than our relationship, and you not taking that for granted, or advantage of that
Oh,
trusting.
definitely. I mean, like, I think that our conversations on this is ongoing. Since this originally started as like a college project, she really did not see this going any further. And so the fact that it keeps going further, I have to keep having this conversation of like, are you okay with this? And I'm submitting to another festival. How do you feel about this? And just like having to keep check in with her, and her being like, how many people have seen my face without makeup at this point? And me being like, probably hundreds, but you're okay. As long as you don't feel uncomfortable, then we're good.
Mahalo.
Yeah, that's a great point, because it's can start so small, which is you with the camera, and then the audience grows. You don't know, you know, how it's going to expand. And for me, I wanted to set up from the very beginning that I was coming in as someone who was visiting extended family and given this warm reception, but also as an outsider that was drawn to these kind of tourist projections, and being drawn to that and kind of interrogating why that is, and kind of start as a starting point of talking to my great uncle Henry I think that he really kind of set the tone of the film because he was so fiery and direct and loved to just get into it, and was always, even at his age, was even taking in new ideas, information, would listen to you. And I think it really did set the tone of the film of why not be a little more direct and a little more in the approach. And it kind of branched out from there, as you see in the film, where he said, well, if I can speak to something, if I can't, I'll point you in the right direction, and just kind of went to different conversations from there. I think with each person I spoke to, it's a different relationship, and it has to do with what you feel the power is in the balance. Can somebody that you're speaking to represent themselves independently? Do they have less power than you? Do they have more? For people that I felt had less power, I was very conscious of how they're being portrayed, that they knew what the scope of the project was and what the questions were leading to. For someone that I thought had more power, I just said the things I wanted to say and just kind of let it go from there. But it always changed, and it kind of had to involve, like, for example, with the Native Hawaiian activists at Wailua, they were there doing a very concrete action. I told them about the film, and they were connecting to the ideas, but it wasn't, they knew that they were going to be a small part of this film. They knew it wasn't, I didn't want to oversell it as this activist piece for them. So what we came up with was whatever I filmed with them, I would give them the footage and they could recut it if they wanted to make something a little more direct, just so it felt like the exchange was fair. Unfortunately, as you see in the film, the group disbanded and it wasn't something that could be realized. So I don't know if it would have worked, but that's kind of what felt right at the time. So yeah, it was really case by case. With my cousins, it was different because they were my age, they were still, or younger, and they were still figuring out their lives. They didn't have it was a different dynamic of questioning because it wasn't like my great uncle Henry, who had lived all these particular periods in Kauai and had these great stories to look back on. They're still, living their life right now, actively kind of unsure, and they don't know what's next. So yeah, it was always different who I was talking to.
Mahalo for sharing. Yeah, there's a lot of different relationships that you could see progress throughout the film, but it was just so well done. Also with their elements of going back to, like, every time you showed a name from one of the big five, it like went back to the original way you presented it. So like as many places and touch points and themes that you touched upon, like it was just so woven together so nicely, so beautifully, like a lay. But yeah, navigating those relationships, I did see in Cane Fire as well, like how correct me if I'm wrong, I don't recall this individual's name, but or whether he was a relation to you, or like you had been introduced through your family, but he had originally spoken with you, and then later in the film you had said, while in filming, like in the middle of the night, he had given me a call and he wanted to like tell more about my story. Could you talk a little bit about like just that moment, like where this individual opened up to you, and like what that meant for you, and how did that change your film or any?
Yeah, that was Mike, who I met really early in the filming. It's actually someone, how you see him introduced on camera for the first time is exactly how I met him, was at this luau like performance, and I was just filming in the crowd. I was given permission to film through the crowd, and he was a worker there, and he was lighting the torches, and he just waves and say hey, and then I talked to him and asked him if I could interview him. And so when it cuts from that night to him in the parking lot out front, that's pretty much the exchange, what it was. And he, was just catching him between shifts before going back to work, that exchange that you see. And it was only after several years later that you see that interview, and he's very distraught because this is as he's explained, this job that he's worked a long time to get full-time from working that Lihui plantation to this the tropical paradise, like luau setup. And it was, at the time, you know, it was when I was sitting down with him, it was very much him needing to get something off his chest, really direct. So we went all the way back, and I think maybe he had not talked about things in this way before, and feeling very, you know, desperate, like feeling, when you see him say, you know, I need to work off, I need to pay the mortgage, I need to pull from my pension, like this is in the moment, things are going through his head. And, you know, it got that scene always, every time I watch it, it makes me so, it really is heavy every time, because I feel that it comes across in the film, but also just the moment of it. I can still think about it. And, you know, I kind of let it go, sit for a while, and because he had not signed off on it yet. And then I waited for a while, and I called him and said, okay, this is the project. And he was actually concerned that he was going to be called out, or he was feeling very uncomfortable about the whole thing, because it was just very fresh. And it turned out, after a while, I showed him a previous film of mine and kind of showed, no, I'm not here to, you know, shame you for what you've been through, or catch you in this vulnerable space. And then he eventually agreed to, you know, keep the documentation. But it's always, you know, you have to kind of recognize, you know, if someone's in the sensitive place, like what's going to transcend or make it worth documenting, rather than just being, you know, too much sorrow, or just, you know, it has to mean something more.
Mahalo for sharing. Whew, yeah. As storytellers and filmmakers, and that's a lot of kuleana, that's a lot of responsibility. And I can feel and see the care, the malama that you folks showed in your films on that. I do, yes, and I have a question for you both, because all of your characters, especially Mike there in Cane Fire, and your mother, Ha'aheo in Malihini, divulged such difficult truths, like such difficult realities, and heartache that you were able to share and portray in your films. I wanted to ask then, did your subjects of your film get to watch the final piece, and did they share their initial reactions with you, or any feedback? And it also gets me to thinking too, Anthony, like throughout your film, which I thought was hilarious and needed, what, like, you kept asking people, like, have you seen these films, these Hollywood films in Kauai? And everyone's like, what? So I wonder, have you asked them, well, did you see this film? My Cane Fire? But yeah, Ha'aheo, if you wanted to share.
Yeah, totally. Wow. I did show my mom the first edit, and then subsequently the final edits of the film. My mother is way too nonchalant than she should be. She's like, it was amazing. It was beautiful. It was great. Obviously, she's always like, I wish I wore makeup. I wish I looked better that day. And I was like, Mom, you look beautiful always. Stop it. And when I show it to other people, I don't think my mother realizes just how much impact that she has on people, and just like how much her words echo for people. When I showed it to my siblings, I'm the middle child of 5 kids. They all get really emotional. They're like, whoa, I can't believe Mom said this, or like, this is exactly how I feel, or just like so starstruck and like blown away that they just have to sit there for a moment. And that's how it is with like all the reactions I've gotten thus far from Malihini, is just people being so blown away by what my mother is saying, and just like how much it echoes within them, the truth that she's saying. And I don't think she realizes that. And I don't think that my mother realizes, and I hope she does now, just how much like her words have created this thread for people, and that like there are words that she's said that people will carry with them, whether like very small bits or the whole thing. There's going to be just like little echoes, and she's going to be a part of that.
Mahalo for sharing. Yes, please tell your mom if she doesn't know already. She made me cry. I cried so much. Being now a mother myself to a Pepe who, you know, is not necessarily Kama'aina, one of the land, now knowing that I'm going to raise her in Seattle, in that sense. And yeah, just hearing your mom's words, it like just spoke to the soul. So, mahalo. Anthony?
Yeah, my family has seen the film. Not everyone in the film has seen it, but you know, it was again going back to what I was talking about, you know, of the power structure, you know, who I wanted to talk with and be clear on how the film was how they're being portrayed. I always followed up in that manner, and I think that what was most important to me, or I was most nervous about, because I had showed my cousin Dylan and he, you know, he enjoyed it, but I was nervous about my cousin Sandy, who you see in the film, where you know, she has Native Hawaiian roots and she's a manager of the hotel, and I have so much. I'm really like in awe of her. Like I have so much respect for her, but I was worried that because she wasn't in, you know, the most idealized light, you know, it was very real. It was like she had ties, but then she had to pay rent and she had to do these things to stay on the island and work in the tourism industry. And I know that she knows that I understand that. And I was just worried that telling that part, she might feel bad or embarrassed, but you know, she really loved the film, and that's just, again, just kind of her character. She's just very confident and knows she's doing, you know, she has a connection, and that meant a lot to me. Yeah, I think, and also Dylan as well was important because, again, I wanted to show, you know, Dylan is my cousin that worked at Kukiula. You know, we spend time with him in his apartment with his daughter Mava, and you know, I wanted to really show him as like, you know, he's doing the contract. He's you know, putting in, you know, as he says, you know, I'm willing to put in the work to stay here, and he's struggling, but he's not a victim. He's resilient, but you know, he's having a hard time in a way that a lot of people in Kauai can identify with. And you know, I know some people that live in Kauai and they see his basement apartment and it makes them really like, oh God, that's like my experience. Or like, you know, friends and collaborators I show in New York, it's like, it's all that kind of struggle. You're working towards something, and you know, the ideal versus the realistic. And yeah, I think that, again, it shows what a strong sense of character he is, that he saw that and knew that, you know, what the intention of the project was. It wasn't meant to make people feel sorry for him, but kind of understand where he was coming from.
Mahalo for sharing. Yes, and also outlining that, you know, not pigeonholing people who are a part of this system where it is systematically trying to keep us down, and that we're not just pigeonholed as victims to systemic racism, but that we are caught in the consequences of it, and highlighting how powerful that our communities and our families are facing it. But that regardless of like all of the mana, all of the power, that with these systems in place, it is making it extremely, putting our family and loved ones and community members in difficult situations, without resources, without actual choice, you know. You know, the systems as they are now want to make it seem like you do have a choice, like you do have a choice to work or and make money or not. But you know, you're highlighting the type of work that's allowed, or how Ha'aheo, your mother, is talking about, like, would we have been able to get our children into college? You know, that was my mom's concern as well. You know, my sister and I are the first in our Native Hawaiian family to have a 4-year college degree. Both we went to Seattle University. And it's just like, is there really choice? Yeah. Is this how it's talking to me? Mahalo. We are, I think, like kind of reaching the end too. I don't know also if you all had questions for each other. I did not really factor in time for that, but as we're nearing the end, I did want to ask you maybe 2 more questions. You each divulge your own take on your identity, as well as others' take on your identity in your films. How, or has the creation of these films for yourselves propelled you in any direction in that journey of self-identity, like of your identity? And if it has, would you be willing to share that?
Well, Anthony, I think you should go.
Okay. That's tough because, you know, when I started the film and I was this awkward haole, you know, trying to grasp at connections with my family, I can't say that I've, you know, I still have this curiosity, and that's like, and kind of exploring this creative route, but I can't say that, maybe to give you an example, I've shown it to cousins, but I have an auntie who saw it and she's like, you know, my entry point or the way I see things is still uptight, you know, and how it's like, it's not like the journey of the film, I think, changed me as in a narrative sense, like as a character growth. Like I feel like my interest and my inquiry kind of led me somewhere, and it led me close to family through these connections but I think that's just my personality, is like, that's how I connect with people, is, you know, and in New York and other places, is through you know, creativity and these ideas and organizing. And the growth of belonging, I don't know, that's still that's a ways away, but like that, I think, to me, was the way that I felt connected to my family. So yeah, I guess it's still yet to be determined.
Oh yeah, it's a lifelong thing. I feel like every time I find a little bit more nugget of like truth,
Right.
it like complicates things 10 times more than it was before. You know, I'm like 3 steps forward, 20 steps back. But it's a great journey. Ha'aheo, of your journey?
Wow, my journey. Well, I am 22 years old, so I'm still very pliable and mushy. So there's like so many things that can change about my identity. But yeah, I think for me, in a lot of ways, creating Malihini has strengthened my identity. Not just as like a Kanaka Maoli and as a Native Hawaiian, I think also it strengthened my identity as a filmmaker. This was my first short film I made, and I, for a long time after making it and like releasing it to different festivals, I felt a lot of imposter syndrome about it. And I felt a lot of like, am I really a filmmaker for making this? Like, I don't feel good enough. You know, I made this with my freaking phone. Like, I was like, I don't have all the expensive equipment people have. You know, I don't have like all the teams. I made this with literally no money. And so for a very long time, I felt very imposter. Like, I feel like I don't belong in these spaces. And just like being able to know that I created not just my truth, but my mother's truth, like really solidified for me that like being a filmmaker does not look a certain way, and that there are so many multitudes to being a filmmaker, and there's so many different ways of being a filmmaker. And for me, like I've come to like I've come to stand in the fact that being a filmmaker is my truth, just as much as like being a native Hawaiian filmmaker is my truth. Yeah, like this film came from this whole like idea that like I for a very long time was just like convinced myself that I was like the child of white supremacy simply by being a white mixed native Hawaiian and simply by being a native Hawaiian displaced from my land. And like for so long I was very bitter about that. I was very bitter about being mixed, and I was very bitter about being like severed from that connection of home, and so having to wrestle with that. And so from that, after I made Malihini, I was like, well, I can't just focus on my mother. So following Malihini, I made a 10-minute experimental documentary about myself, where I like cover myself in fake blood, and I have a conversation with myself about blood quantum. It was a lot. I like jumped in Lake Washington covered in fake blood, and I have never felt more cold in my life. But it was like the next step from Malihini to this film that I made called Blood Logic to now. It was like all these steps that I needed to take to not just solidify me as a filmmaker, but just like my identity as a Hawaiian.
Whew. So much snaps and everything. That was everything just then from the both of you. Identity is not only, but is very much so heritage and history and ancestry and race, especially in the type of society and world we live in. But also, yes, like identity is so much bigger than that. Identity is who we know, who we love, is our family, is our place, is our home, is our life's work, and our art and our passion, our filmmaking, our storytelling. Like to see you both share so much of yourselves on that never-ending journey, you know, is extremely powerful. I am so appreciative of the mana that you all just shared right then. And imposter syndrome is so real. It's so real. And I feel it all the time too, as a Kanaka Maoli blood quantum. Oh my goodness. You know, I'm the daughter of a Black woman, and people are like, no, it's a whole thing. So I feel you. I'm so appreciative of you both for sharing that. You all both just gave me personal game just now, but in a choose your own adventure for this next and last question from me, at least, what advice in the context of these two films, these two amazing films, Malihini and Cane Fire, do you want to give? Whether that's advice to your audience members, advice to fellow filmmakers, advice to, you know, Kanaka Maoli mothers of second generation children getting raised in the Pacific Northwest. What type of advice would you want to leave our time today?
I'm thinking about, lately I've been thinking about young filmmakers, like what advice I would give to a young filmmaker. And for me, this is my first feature-length project. It's been a long time, on and off for about 6 years. And, you know, there were so many things, it was so precarious at times that could have just easily just gone under and never have been finished. And I think what kept me going was I surrounded myself with really people that, you know, I could bounce ideas off of, people I respected, activists, historians, journalists. I kept this network and kept this conversation going so that they were kind of my support network that was, that really moved with the project in a way that was best for it, not, you know, if a cultural institution says, okay, here's a trend, or this is what we should focus on, or they're kind of visualizing what the audience is, you keep like very true to, you know, the people you want to have a conversation with to the very end. I think that's the only way that kept the project in a way that made me feel good about it and proud of it, because it's the way I wanted to do it. You will encounter people that maybe mean well, but they're kind of, even in form and content, they are used to doing things in a certain way. And this is like, things are evolving. The use of archive, the use of all these things are brand new concepts that you're often discouraged by. And, you know, if it wasn't for a small core group that said, okay, we're going to use this if it feels right, and not think about anything else. Like, does it serve the piece? Does it strengthen it? Because if we would have seen it any other way, they would have said, we don't want to deal with this, or this seems complicated or messy. And yeah, it was the only thing that carried it through. Otherwise, I would have been pulled left and right by, you know, an organization saying, oh, we should do this or that, or we want to hit this. And, you know, the audience is changing, you know, it's always shifting. So I think as long as you keep that core group that's separate from any other consideration, I think it helps you focus all the way through.
Mahalo for paving that way for more and more incredible filmmakers. Ha'aheo, some advice you'd like to give? Choose your own adventure.
I don't know if this is advice. I hope it's advice. But some words for audience members or people listening that I came to realize in making this. You are so much more. You are so much more than you think you are. You are worth so much more than you think you are, and you're capable of so much more. In making this film and showing it to people, I had a lot of also displaced Kanakas like come to me, both my peers and just people in the community come to me and be like, I resonate so much with your film. I don't feel Hawaiian enough. I don't know what to do with that. And just me having to help guide them in such a way of understanding that you're worth more than just thinking you're not enough. I think that we need to stop with this association of like, when we as Hawaiians divide ourselves and start to associate with ourselves as not enough, like what does that say about not just ourselves as people, but like who we are collectively as a community if we are not enough? And so just like, yeah, just leaving it with like, you are enough and that you are capable of making beautiful things and you're capable of like creating such a beautiful life for yourself. Even if you don't think it right now, things will come.
Mahalo nui loa. No ko olua mana nui. Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you so much for spending this time in redefining what it means to be a filmmaker, redefining identity and reclaiming identity in its many, many, many forms. Really empowering me and all those who are watching, I know, to be our fullest selves, and to live our own truths and to live our realities and to reclaim our realities from and decolonize the past for the future, for our communities and families. So mahalo. Thank you so much for all of that you had done in just this short amount of time. And we're excited to know that, yes, you folks are both currently working on new works right now. Did you want to give, Ha'aheo had shared some, I don't know if you also have additional, wanted to give like a shout out for that, like keep a lookout for the next works by Anthony, including
Sure. I think mine's in a bit of an early phase, so maybe I'll hold off.
Okay.
There's something, yeah.
Keep an eye out for that. Any that you wanted to shout out, Ha'aheo?
Currently, right now, I am writing and directing a short film with friends of mine at the Seattle University Film Studies program and the club, to make a short film about two childhood friends who go camping and they go to find the baby teeth they buried as kids. And it is my love letter to the Pacific Northwest, as I have lived here for the past 12 years. And it's very weird to be Hawaiian and feel such a strong connection to a place I despised when I first moved here. So this is my love letter, in a sense, to this place.
Beautiful, beautiful. Mahalo for you both. We are so excited to see, what you folks create next. Mahalo for being a part of the Seattle Asian American Film Festival. Having you both here in the festival with the many touch points on your personal journeys, like that in itself is also just a love letter to this space. We are so appreciative to have you here. Again, it's our 10th annual celebration. Please, for all those of you at home, check out the other great programs that we have playing at SAAFF right now, available virtually from March 3rd to the 13th, 2022 at bit.ly/SAAFF2022 exclamation point. We'll put it down in the description. But mahalo again. My name is Kalei. We're so appreciative to have Ha'aheo and Anthony, and I hope that all of you enjoy the rest of your evening and your time with SAAFF. Mahalo nui loa.
Mahalo.